Welcome everyone to this new episode of Tea and Chi with my brother Kevin Oros, KO. So for anyone who doesn't know you already, Kevin, we'd like to know a little bit about who you are, what you're about, and what you do as your profession.
Yeah, awesome. Great to be here, Owen. Appreciate the invite. And yeah, profession, I mainly am working inside of coaching and consulting. I also, facilitate events and do public speaking. The past several years has been really deep in an inquiry around men's work, masculinity, tantra, relating, communication, and also business development as well. These are kind of the main areas I've worked within, supporting entrepreneurs to grow and scale their business in a sustainable way, and also helping creatives, artistic people, folks who are interested in like the deeper layers of emotionality and masculine feminine dynamics of polarity and sexual tension and mastery and intimacy to really nail that. And that's what I do in my book, Sex, Masculinity, God, is really go into these topics with my two co-authors. And yeah, just been living really blessed on a trust fall as a digital nomad and entrepreneur now for about, I guess it's been 7, 8, 9 years, depending on where you start the needle.
So what would you say is an important aspect of embodying all that what you're coaching about? Because a lot of people teach and preach what you're doing, but when I met you, you really embody all that you're teaching, and you're a powerful dude physically, mentally, emotionally. So for somebody who's on the path of wanting to empower themselves, how can they do that in a way that's embodied both emotionally, energetically, and physically?
Mm-hmm. What started my journey is I wasn't embodied. So it's not like, I was always just embodied. And then I still have work to do, obviously. Like I've not completed anything. But, it really starts with practices. It starts with having principles or values, or call it your own philosophy, whatever you want to call it, and then moving in that direction. And then that's going to involve physicality, right? So what are the main physical things we do? Well, we move. So it's going to involve movement, which becomes everything from, hiking or being in nature, walking to, whatever kind of training you're doing, weightlifting, martial arts, yoga, capoeira, dance, whatever. You got to have some kind of movement. That's going to be a huge part of it. Sexuality. So one of the most amazing ways we can use our body is sexuality. So are you embodied in your sexuality, right? On your own and with the partner. And it's going to involve your voice, right? So how you speak and how you enunciate and articulate is important. And that is going to come more powerfully when you're speaking from experience in the body. So, think about everything you use your body for. Food comes in here, sleep, hydration, all the basic stuff, but it becomes very important when we flip the script on, the way we're taught and conditioned in school and by society, which is that you're just a brain, right? You're just an ego, you're a brain, and this is how things work. Everything is a mental construct. It can be understood intellectually, it can be understood through materialism, which, when you go deep into that, it becomes pretty clear that that's a bunch of bullshit and it's not true at all, because there's many, many other dimensions. And denying the body, denying the physicality, the emotions, the sensations, the intuition, it's not going to serve you really well. And this ends up who I support a lot of time in coaching is folks who, have become very disembodied because of their career, because of their trauma, or their belief systems.
I love that you started with the foundation of, I believe you said, philosophy and principles, because that's the most sturdy foundation that I found in the process of embodiment and empowerment. Is if you don't have something to stand for, then you don't have a foundation, you don't have something to stand on. And like you said, we're taught so much about materialism that should be your foundation, that your foundation should be your career or your finances or your even your relationships, which are always fluctuating and changing. But when you have that foundation, that solid foundation of your principles and your philosophies, that's where your rock bottom should be if you want to be really. And I'm not trying to use the word like unfazed, but stoic, being stoic and strong enough to continue on through all the suffering in life and all the joys in life is having that foundation, having that foundational value of love or compassion or uh, healing, something that can hold you when there's nothing else. Because we all go through these transformations where there's something gets pulled out from under us, and what's under that superficial kind of material rug that gets pulled under us is what catches us. So it's interesting that you told me that you weren't always so embodied, because when I met you, you're kind of not at your prime. We're still both heading towards our prime, but pretty prime time KO, like in a good amount of power. So what was a bit of your process in finding that embodiment or finding that authenticity in your empowerment?
Mm-hmm. I mean, it goes to my kind of core principles or core philosophy, right? Which is evolving and has changed a lot over the years, probably even since we met originally. But, for me, growing up, I was totally in my head. I was obsessed with literature. I was obsessed with film, with gaming, with fantasy and imagination. And that was what fed me, because I was very much a loner, very introverted, and didn't feel safe around a lot of other people, because I was very like inward, and therefore my mind developed a shitload, and I was obsessed with stories and like reading Lord of the Rings as a kid and watching Star Wars and playing games and getting into poker and then playing sports, and like just that whole like the masculine striving, competition, the hero's journey, the quest, the adventure, all these kind of archetypes really became very important to me. Now, what changed was at some point I got fed up with, I thought I was going to go to grad school. I was on the academic path in psychology. I was also studying philosophy, and I was like, okay, I'll be an academic. This is what I'm good at. But what I realized is that, I wasn't living in my body. And I looked around at all the people, the professors, the grad students, they weren't living in their body. They were miserable. They're unhealthy. And they were talking about health and wellness intellectually. And physically, they weren't there. So it's just like, how do I reconcile this? And then I found psychedelics. Then I found yoga. Then I found martial arts. And I was like, oh shit, I was completely wrong here. Then I later found Qigong and Tantra and Tai Chi and like what the Taoist and the Hindu, like, strains of Tantra, and just realized, wow, I need to inhabit my body. And, yoga helped a lot with that. Qigong, Tai Chi helped a lot with that initially. But then at some point, like you can be super fit, right? You can see these guys that are physically at their pinnacle, right? Like athletes or folks that are like very, very trained physically. And like, they're ripped, or, women can do this too. They can just get extremely physically strong, but that doesn't make you integrated as a human being, because there's a special something, and you can call it charisma, you can call it magnetism, confidence, whatever. Joie de vivre, there's a lot of different words for it. Elan vital, there's all these words that Freud and Jung and these guys used to describe it. But it's just basically you're integrated. So your emotions and your thoughts and your physicality are all pointed in the same direction. And it gives you this unshakable confidence that we call embodiment. Like, what even is embodiment, right? This was a big debate at one of these men's events I was doing here in Europe, is like, what is embodiment? Like what the fuck does that even mean? And that's a good question. What does it mean? Maybe we can define it for ourselves, but for me, it's having that it's basically meaning. You're enacting meaning or performing meaning is how I think about it at this point. So if you have a strong purpose or meaning, or you have a very strong sense of yourself, which means you love yourself and you also know what your skills and weaknesses are,